This series is written chronologically. If you are new to the series, you must start at Season 1, Episode 1. Thank you. The Blood-Drawn Chronicles, Season 5, Origins Unveiled, was written by Michael Bradley and produced by DigiFox Studios. If you'd like to contribute towards our next season, titled Season 6, Symphony of the Osprey, please visit www.patreon.com/TBDC and take advantage of the awesome perks we have available. We want to take this time to thank Lord Saunders from www.lordsaunders.com for the wonderful audio mastering of the episode you're about to enjoy. As always, thank you for listening, and now our story begins.
I was about 14 when I found myself privy to study under one of the greatest minds of my profession the world had ever known, Dr. Simon Clifton.
Simon Clifton. Clifton. Where have I heard that name before?
You haven't. At least, not the Dr. Clifton I knew. No, the doctor I knew was of brilliant mind, yet meager popularity. Don't take this the wrong way, as this may sound platitudinous, but only incandescent minds were ever brightened by his brilliance. Thus, that was all he surrounded himself with.
I see, sir.
Over the years, Dr. Clifton would grow to become somewhat of a father figure to me. I became his second, and we took on many complex cases together, which present events bring me to recall one of our earlier cases once more. We had the habit of giving titles instead of numbers to our cases, and the one I'm recalling now took place during our first visit to France. We named the case La Belle et le Besou.
The Beauty and the Hunchback.
Ah, you know your French, Mr. Finlay.
Having a proper knowledge of all Latin-based languages is a key part of being a great scribe, sir.
Indeed. Anyhow, yes, the Beauty and the Hunchback was what we called the case between Anna Beaumont and Bernard Jacques. How's your pen, scribe?
Dipped, sir.
Good. You'll find this story a bit less preposterous than Myrick and Alannah's. Our story begins upon our arrival at Anna Beaumont's family home in the small French town of Beaumont. The Lady Anna's father welcomed us inside his house and guided us to his daughter's room, where we found the young lady strapped to her bed.
I beg your pardon, sir, but just to make sure I have this correct here, she was strapped to a bed in her own home.
Precisely. As it happened to be, Anna Beaumont was abducted from her home. She was found 1 year later, hiding in the cemetery keep with the sexton hunchback named Bernard Jacques.
Good God, sir! Was he the one who took her?
Yes. Apparently, after the death of her grandfather, Miss Beaumont would visit him there on frequent basis, which is where Mr. Jacques first laid eyes on her beauty.
He took her. The scum. I hope he got what he deserved.
He got an arrow to the face, to be precise. Anyhow, the story of how he took her, or why, is not what I'm trying to tell here, but rather the unseen effect it had on the Lady Anna after his death.
Sir?
She was strapped to her bed when we met her, but it wasn't for the reasons one would think. She wanted to, and attempted to die, but for what Bernard Jacques had done to her? No, she wanted to die because she could not bear to live in a world without him.
I have to say that you've lost me, sir. Was it not Jacques who abducted her and took her from her home, away from her loved ones?
It was, which was why the behavior was not the norm. Dr. Clifton and I stayed with her for days studying her condition. It floored us both to witness she had developed a genuine love for the man who kidnapped her, chained her, and raped her. We took several key notes in efforts to properly identify this syndrome, but alas, it was not found in any books. So we called it Beaumont syndrome. And this, my dear scribe, is what we noted of it. It was a condition that caused the hostage to develop a psychological alliance with their captor as a survival strategy during captivity. These feelings, resulting from a bond formed between captor and captive during intimate time spent together, were generally considered irrational in light of the danger or risk endured by the victim. Generally speaking, said syndrome consists of strong emotional ties that develop between two persons where one person intermittently harasses, beats, threatens, abuses, or intimidates the other. In all the years spent in my profession, roughly 4% of victims showed evidence of this syndrome. Its significance arises because it's based on a paradox, as captive sentiments for the captors are the opposite of the fear and disdain an onlooker may expect to see as a result of trauma. There are 4 key components that generally lead to the development of Beaumont syndrome. 1. A hostage's development of positive feelings towards their captor. 2. No previous hostage-captor relationship. 3. A refusal by hostages to cooperate with law enforcement and other government authorities. And 4. A hostage's belief in the humanity of their captor, for the reason that when a victim holds the same values as the aggressor, they cease to be perceived as a threat.
I see, sir.
This syndrome is not merely a condition developed in victims of kidnappings or hostage instances. It can also be applied to a wide variety of situations, afflicting victims of domestic or child abuse and incest. Prisoners of war, cult members, town prisoners, slaves, and prostitutes can all fall prey to it. In my experience, women are especially subject to develop the condition. Typically, Beaumont syndrome develops in captives when they engage in face-to-face contact with their captors, as well as when captors make captives doubt the likelihood of their survival by aggressively terrorizing them into helpless, powerless, and submissive states.
Just like Miss Alannah.
Precisely, Mr. Finley. This enables captors to appear to be nice people when captors perform acts of kindness on or fail to beat, abuse, or rape the victims. Evolutionarily speaking, 18 years of my own research give evidence that exists to support the genuine scientific nature of Beaumont syndrome. And I've found in my studies that responses similar to those in human captives have been detected in some reptiles and mammals, primates in particular. Ideas like dominance hierarchies and submission strategies assist in devising explanations for the logical reasoning behind the symptoms of those suffering as a result of an oppressive relationship of any kind. One of the adaptive problems faced by our hunter-gatherer ancestors, particularly females, was being abducted by another band. And so clearly given evidence to support the facts, we can determine Miss Alannah's condition to be an absolute characterization of said syndrome.
Indeed, sir.
Indeed, Mr. Finley. Taken purely from note, Alannah's perception of Myrick is both one of fear and affection, which is why her story never added up. C967 allowed her to express her emotions truthfully, from her perspective, mind you. This was the reason behind her fantasy. You see, in the real world, Myrick is her gallant knight. But the gallantry defined was misinterpreted by acts of defilement. Thus, to cope with the reality, she reinterprets what she defines as gallant in the first place. Mr. Myrick's metaphoric nature, as well, did not help but to further inspire her world. Note how he spoke allegorically with me the entire time during our sessions. He claimed to be a beast with incomprehensible power. He claimed to be beyond the fabric of mortality. Prolonged exposure to this method of behavior no doubt began to rub off on Miss Alannah.
Which is why the stories were so well paired with one another, sir.
Were they? If you clearly took notice, Mr. Myrick's reaction to Alannah's story at first was one of absolute absurdity, followed by a pressing desire to learn more of what she told me. This immediate change in behavior showed his dominance over his victim. Lastly, he attempted to play the devil's advocate by posing and remaining as obdurate as ever. He's known Miss Alannah privately and puritly as many times as his heart's desired, so it's a sure thing that he recognizes and leeches off of her imagination and carries her delusions.
The monster.
Gifted with a clever mind nonetheless, a mind shrewd enough to turn the performance of rape into a romantic endeavor.
You're not seriously applauding such an execution, sir.
Of course not. No, I'm simply stating that from a psychological point, this is no mere feat to accomplish. Remember, Mr. Finley, 12 hours under the influence of my serum, and Miss Alannah still held on to certain signs of affection for him. This in itself should serve to prove just how deep Myrick was able to penetrate her psychosis. Which is why I had the right mind to act upon the following.
By following, sir, you mean...
Precisely, Mr. Finley. The death of Myrick the monster. Are you ready to write again?
More than ever before, sir.
Good, because it was not long after speaking with Miss Alannah that I had completed the concoction that would end Mr. Myrick. And now well armed, I made the journey to his cell for the last time.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to like, share, comment, and, most importantly, subscribe. Don't feel like waiting until next week for the next Blood Drawn episodes to release? No problem. You can get access to all the episodes of this season now for just a $5 pledge on Patreon.